In this episode, we will be discussing police violence and racism. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back to Thin Blue Lies. I'm here today with S for A from Socialism for All on YouTube. This week we are discussing Cop City. Cop City is the nickname for the cop training facility being lobbied for by corporations in Atlanta. So why is Cop City bad? Cop City will function as a police and fire training center. Over 400 acres will be handed over to build this 85-acre training facility costing $90 million. Cop City will destroy the city of Atlanta's forests, which is its main defense against flooding. As climate change is worsened, once-in-a-generation storms become yearly occurrences, and this forest is needed to soak up the rain and prevent flooding. They want to turn that green space into shooting ranges, spaces for militarized drills, and a mock city to practice urban warfare. Just to give you an idea of how big an area they want to use for this, it would be 85 NFL football fields combined. Clear-cutting the forest will have devastating effects on the environment, including worsened air quality and flooding in the predominantly black neighborhoods of southeast Atlanta. Furthermore, the Atlanta Police Department's current and future use of chemical weapons will poison the soil and waters, endangering Atlantans' health. By funding Cop City, the Atlanta Police Foundation is using a common strategy to increase militarized policing, relying on corporate sponsors to bypass legislative processes and fund controversial projects that ultimately saddle city taxpayers with an estimated $30 million bill. This pro-militarized police organization funds youth centers as a way to sanitize their image while back-channeling millions of dollars to police departments without politicians or the public knowing. Instead of supporting community-based public safety initiatives that keep people safe, police foundations directly donate or help police departments pay surveillance software and equipment, military weapons, SWAT team equipment, and other tools that are used to terrorize black people. This will be used to wage urban warfare more efficiently against the United States citizens. This will become the largest police training facility nationwide and already has international support. So, yeah.
Yeah, the Atlanta Police Foundation that is funding this thing, it's interesting because only about a third of the funding, from what I read, for Cop City is actually coming from the city.
Right.
Two-thirds
The
of
$30
it.
million is coming from the city, and then the $60 million is coming from...
And so anyway, yeah, it's a third of it is public funding, but two-thirds of it is just coming directly from corporations. So as far as, living in a corporate police state, this is very literally that. The corporations say, we're concerned about all this social unrest and progressive struggle against capitalism and people trying to assert their civil rights and democratic rights. Let's, pour millions of dollars into building this cop compound so that we can be ready for any kind of urban disturbances, etc.
So the list is as follows: Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, Waffle House, Axon Enterprise, Atlanta Hawks, the arena, Georgia State University, Inspire Brands, Home Depot, UPS, Delta Airlines, Chick-fil-A, and Amazon.
So there you go. Yeah, so this is like corporations basically just trying to directly, obviously the capitalist government is a way for all of the various, large, rich capitalist interests to act in their class interest. But sometimes, the capitalist state isn't even enough. They need to go and, start these private funds to put that directly into it. So, there's always that flow between what is public and what is private, and capitalism that's still serving the same basic interest of promoting, capitalist class exploitation, and the police are a major, major tool of that.
I mean, this is where
So,
this is fascism, like this
yeah,
melding of the government, like the state apparatus and the corporations. So,
yeah, we're far into this process at this point. I
right.
mean, far, far into it. And the we were just covering on the show the other day the flashier aspects of fascism, such as the spectacular sort of police repression. That is often what gets highlighted as it's the more exciting part that people can kind of latch onto. And it is an important component of fascism is the police repression. The core of it, though, is really kind of more the austerity and the immiseration of people, the cutting of services. In the neoliberal era, the defunding, privatization, deregulation that's commonplace everywhere. That creates the very vulnerable and impoverished working class that then is over policed. All that money is not going into social programs, it goes into police. So we'll be talking
Hmm.
later about how this ties in with police abolition. But certainly when we talk about the fascist agenda and that process, a lot of times I think people are in denial about the state of advanced fascisation
Fascism.
yeah, in the United States, but it's very far along. We have both the austerity and the gutting of social programs. That's the core of it. And then the super advanced police state, and that's visible like around every corner. So
Correct.
as far as the history behind what's going on with the land, so where they're actually trying to build Cop City outside of the city of Atlanta. So long before this area was, it was a thriving trade hub for Native Americans throughout the continent. Every story that happens in the United States is a story of genocide, colonialism, broken treaties, and the unnatural division of interconnected land into individual parcels for ownership, treating it as capitalist property. The most frequently cited history of the land is a historical analysis of the Atlanta prison farm by Gillian Wooten of the city planning department. In that document, we're told that the Key Road property was purchased in 1918 by the Bureau of Prisons and the United States federal government. It was at that time called the Honor Farm, and federal prisoners grew crops and raised livestock to feed the population of the nearby federal penitentiary. The piece claims that the site operated until 1965. At that point, it was purchased by the Atlanta city government, and it was shut down soon after. And then at that point, the history becomes murky, as a single report of a labor strike on the land seems to contradict the closing. Underground are the much older remains of the Muskogee Creek people who lived in what they called the Welaunee Forest. That was the name for this area, and actually the Stop Cop City protesters have brought back that name, the Welaunee Forest, until they were forcibly removed by white settlers in the 1820s and 1830s. So later on, the forest was home to what has been called the finest plantation in the county, and it was also the site of a famous Civil War battle. So there were terrible conditions at the prison. There was overcrowding, death and sickness always looming. So this land has kind of a dark history. It's been the site of, obviously the removal of the people who lived here for hundreds and hundreds of years before European settlers came, forcible, violent removal. And then it was a penitentiary. It was or rather, the farm connected with the penitentiary. It was a plantation, and it's finally achieved some modicum of peace. It's just a forest, and it's one of the, as they say, the lungs of Atlanta. Plants, of course, do a lot of processing carbon dioxide and oxygen. Forests are also
You know, guys,
a
that thing we
store
need
of water.
to breathe. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
no big
Especially in a
deal.
city, city with all the emissions from the vehicles and industrial stuff, you kind of want some fresh air wafting over once in a while.
For
And they
sure.
want to just, yeah, clear out acres and acres of it. So, that's, I think, that's been a key thing. A lot of the protests have been they've at least had a strong environmentalist component to them. There's interconnected issues, obviously the anti-capitalist, anti-police themes, but the environmental themes are important as well because this is one of the biggest areas of some sort of wild green space near the city. You need things like that, and they're just gonna bulldoze it. And for what? To build a training facility to further
Fight
oppress the
citizens.
people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Instead of having this green space that is needed to soak up the rainwater, so the city doesn't flood. Like, this is going to have a major effect on residents there. So,
Yeah, and they've gone as far. Some of the people in the city government and connected with the effort to build Cop City. There's also an effort to build a large sound stage. People might be aware that Georgia has become it's sort of like a filming destination. Might know The Walking Dead has been filmed there. And anyway, somebody wants to build a very large sound stage. So you'd have that's being fought. They also want to build this massive police training center. And they've gone as far, some of the people defending those projects, not defending the forest, but defending those projects, they've gone as far as saying that, oh, it's not really a forest. It's just some sort of overgrown, grassland. That's the level of honesty that you get.
it's just a place where a bunch of trees gather.
Yeah, it's not a forest though,
It's not a forest. It's just a bunch of trees next to each other. Okay?
Yeah, who cares? Who cares about a bunch of trees? Just some weeds. They're just tall weeds.
So
So,
goofy. So,
yeah, but anybody can look up those videos and see what it really is. It's a beautiful forest, and when you're living in a city, being able to get out into a space like that is healing. We're not meant to be around concrete 24/7.
no, yeah, it's bad for your mental health. So in 2017, the South River Forest was designated as one of the four major city lungs in a report titled The Atlanta City Design, put together by Atlanta City's Planning Department. The report the report's lead author was Ryan Gravel, a Georgia Tech alum whose graduate thesis led to the creation of the city's ballyhooed Beltline Greenway. Gravel and his co-authors envisioned the South River Forest as a great urban park and conservation corridor. The city council formally adopted the plan, and Gravel began working on the Nature Conservancy to make it a reality. In March of last year, a 200-acre parcel surrounding a drained lake 3 miles south of the prison farm, which could have become another landfill, was approved for permanent preservation. Then, the following month, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, a Democrat, made an announcement that the area was around the prison farm was going to be the site of a sprawling training facility for police and firefighters. This, Gravel said, was a big surprise, obviously, because he had just gotten, the approval to save that land. And they're like, psych. So, many people in Atlanta were startled by the news, including Joe Santifer, who told me that he'd already been bothered by the police presence. In the forest. For decades, the Atlanta PD has operated a firing range there, and on his forest strolls, Santifer has begun hearing gunfire. Even from a distance, he said it sounds like a battleground. He emailed a complaint to the city, and a few days later, he got a response, call 911.
Yeah,
Wow.
that ought to help. That's yeah, not really the kind of thing you want to hear
When you're
walking through.
walking through the fucking forest, you're having a
Yeah,
nice
that's disturbing.
stroll with your family, and you hear, like, that is not what I want to hear in the forest.
No, that definitely undermines the whole relaxing component to being out there.
They told
So
him
in
to
the years
call
since,
911.
yeah, I
Really?
mean, who's gonna arrive then? Well, again, we'll be talking about police abolitionism later on. I mean, bringing the cops is bringing the violence. Basically, you're just likely to escalate any random issue. You call them because you hear gunfire. they show up and then they wind up arresting you for something like,
They're
you
like,
know,
yeah, that's our
uh,
gunfire, and what?
yeah.
And then what?
So in the years since Bottom's announcement, a different sort of battleground has taken shape. She and others, including Georgia's Republican governor Brian Kemp, have described the training facility as an answer to Atlanta's recent rise in violent crime. So the number of homicides in the city spiked in 2020. Last year, Atlanta police investigated more than 150 homicides, the highest one-year total since the mid 90s. And I want to make a comment about that, which is that's their narrative. However, I found a very interesting article, I think it was from Crime Think, and just actually when we are getting ready for the show, where they had a very interesting counter narrative that emphasized more. They're running with the violent crime story to try to sell
The
the.
funding, the
Yeah,
training
exactly.
facility, yeah.
However, what the other thing that happened in 2020 was major resistance. Obviously, that was the summer of the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd protests. And in that article, they kind of broke down how there had been growing movements against the police and this and that. And this actually may be, the violent crime story may be more of a cover for, the real motivation, which is the people were getting active against the police politically. But anyway, continuing. Um, Other cities have lately built or proposed similar facilities, but at 85 acres, Atlanta's would be much larger than nearly all of the others. New York City, for instance, has a 30-acre facility for a force 15 times the size of the Atlanta PD. The APD's facility planned features include a firing range, a vehicle skills pad, a burn building for firefighters, and a mock village for staging simulated emergencies. It's slated to cost around $90 million, dollars, with a third of that money coming from public funds and the rest coming from the Atlanta Police Foundation, as we mentioned. The APF, which was founded in 2003, is one of many police foundations created in the past 2 decades. These private nonprofits typically channel corporate money into policing initiatives, expanding police budgets, and in some cases, producing apparent conflicts of interest. Some of Atlanta's most influential people, the CEOs of Waffle House and the Atlanta Hawks, vice presidents from the Home Depot and Delta Airlines, sit on the board. Coca-Cola and Cox Enterprises, a media conglomerate based in Atlanta, are among the corporations that have acknowledged their contributions to the foundation. Cox's CEO, Alex Taylor, is the chair of fundraising for the training facility. Cox owns the city's largest newspaper, the Journal-Constitution, which has published a number of editorials in favor of the facility, has only sometimes disclosed its owner's contributions to the APF. He's been working on Cop City since 2017, but it didn't gain steam until after the protests.
All of these CEOs are on the Atlanta Police Foundation's board. That is not good. That is not good at
Yeah,
all.
it's not a coincidence either. I mean,
No, it's not.
so there's a movie, Riotsville. I'm trying to actually let me get the exact title just so I'm not. I'm going to stick it. Riotsville, USA. People want to check this out. Maybe we can put a link to the trailer. But this is a movie that came out in the last, I think, year or two, where this Cop City thing. It's not the first time that such, plans have been unveiled. I guess back in the early 1970s and maybe late 60s, around the time of the New Left civil rights uprisings. Um, the police around the U.S. in various areas built these, they call them in the movie riotsvilles, which are these mock cities for exactly this purpose, enhanced police training. And again, why? Is it really prompted by rises in violent crime, or is it prompted basically as, counterinsurgency training during times of social unrest? Seems kind of more like the latter, and
Right.
funded by the people who would have the most to lose in a social revolution type of situation.
Exactly.
So, as far as more recently, on January 18, 2023, Georgia's state troopers and other agencies launched another raid. During the raid, a trooper was shot in the leg, and a protester identified as Manuel Terran, known also as Tortuguita, was killed by police. Police stated that Terran fired on them without warning, a story which we know now to be a lie. The first story that they came out with was that there were no body cams, there was no body cam footage, and there was because those body cams have since been leaked. The video starts with the cop reminding them to turn their body cams on, and then the police walk up to a group of tents, red and green, and they scream at the tents until they decide that no one is in them. Then they walk up to the tents, knock them down, cut them with X-Acto knives, and go through all the bags. And this is really typical for the way that the cops have been treating the protesters' stuff that they set up in the forest. No matter how sort of, a lot of it just looks
Benign.
like,
They just fucking
yeah,
destroyed it.
benign and beautiful. I mean, they do some nice sort of art projects where they had like an array of stones with painting lined up, and it's not disturbing the nature in any way. But the police
No,
are
they
just there
destroy
to,
it.
yeah, exactly. They're there to harass and intimidate them. So in after that, after they destroyed the tents, they move on. Which, by the way, is there another way that they could have dealt with that, even if those people weren't allowed to be there? What gives the cops the right to just flat out destroy
Destroy
that property?
right.
But we see this with sweeps against homeless encampments, where
They will throw every
homeless people.
last stitch of their thing in the garbage. They do not give a fuck. They are some
Yeah,
evil bastards.
yeah, and it's like, hey, you're down at the bottom of society. You're not allowed to own any property at all, and it's sickening. It's sickening. So again, talking about imagining alternatives to this system. Um, let's start with this is the worst possible way to deal with a situation like this.
Right.
So anyway, after they're done destroying the property, the police move on, and then you hear four shots fired, followed by what it sounds like several cops firing all at the same time. They claim that Tortuguita fired first. They also claim that there was no body cam footage, though, so how much is their word worth? Soon after the barrage of shooting, an officer can be heard saying, "Man, you fucked your own officer up," implying that they shot each other. Friendly fire. So it looks like, although it's hard to call anything cops are involved with friendly in any capacity, but it looks like they walked up to the tent and just opened fire without giving commands like they did at the first set of tents. Then the APD did a press release in which the GBI claimed that officers, quote, gave verbal commands to the man who did not comply and shot a Georgia State Patrol officer. Private autopsy shows Tehran was shot 13 times by several different officers. So this was, an execution.
Right.
So other protesters were arrested, and I think we have some footage of that.
It's like they were standing around the tent and they all shot into the tent and they like hit each other on the other side of the tent because it was tall. And they're stupid.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. That one's not going to win any, genius awards for sure.
They're stupid and evil because they literally killed a dude for no fucking reason. They just shot into a tent without even getting any orders like they did with the other one. I don't know why they did it differently. Maybe they knew that somebody was in there and they wanted to just kill him.
Yeah, they're murderers. They're murderers.
Right.
I mean, that's a death squad. That's what that is.
It doesn't make any sense why their thing was so different at the other tent.
I mean, again, unless, that was the point.
Right. Which I think it had to have been.
I think it's the only thing that makes sense, that fits all the information.
So we have an interview from one of the protesters. I'm going to play it right now.
I heard the gunshots early on, just a couple minutes after I woke up. And I assumed there had been some people passing through the night before that I didn't really know very well. And it seemed like some people in the chats thought it might have been them. And I just assumed it was these people I didn't know because I didn't want to assume that it was somebody I knew. And I had no knowledge of anybody in the forest even having a weapon. And certainly that no one had discussed with me any intent of violence. The entire point of this protest is that we are just sitting in public space and sitting in trees. And we are not on the offensive. We are on the defensive. We're defending a forest from being clear cut to build a offensive and frankly offensive military facility that is going to be used for violence against the people. And as far as I knew, no one had any arms in the forest at all. And all I knew at the time of my arrest, well, at the time of my kidnapping, was that I had heard gunshots in the distance. I didn't know that there was an officer shot. I didn't know that my friend had been killed. And the officers had not asked me about any of that situation. They did not tell me that I was involved with that. They were essentially silent throughout my search and kidnapping. Now, they're trying to get the felony charge. They're trying to say that we were in cahoots with Tort and we all planned this shooting of this police officer. That they were trying to get us on an aggravated assault. I did not know anything about that. None of us knew anything about that. And it seems like Tort didn't even have a gun. So this whole thing is completely shady as hell.
So basically, they say that Tortuguita did not have a gun, obviously, because the point was just to sit there peacefully in the forest, and that the police are trying to charge them all with aggravated assault because the police officers shot their own.
Yeah, one of the, I mean, yeah, which of course, any blame that they can externalize onto somebody else, they're always going to go for that. One of the things that I was reading in doing the research to do this episode is this is off of Unicorn Riot. The headline of the piece is Atlanta activists say that prosecutors plan to indict them on RICO charges.
Oh yeah.
So RICO is Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was created in the 1970s in order to more effectively prosecute organized crime, mafia, stuff like that. But since then, it's been used against all kinds of different groups that have nothing to do with, the mob as you would think of it. It's been used in the 2019 college admissions scandal. It's been used against anti-abortion groups, inside traders, and now environmental and climate justice activists. So this
Incredible.
basically means that they target organizations. And so the prosecutors have to prove that those charged engaged in a pattern of racketeering involving at least two acts in furtherance of one or more incident schemes or transitions. So it's sort of a, you can just charge anyone connected with this organization for some like alleged thing, and it's utterly despicable. People trying to defend green space against development into a police repression school. Um, is this going to be like a mini school of the Americas, or like what is this going to be? Because it is going to be the largest of its kind. We don't know, how far this is going to be, and
Well,
looking
I
at
mean, it's
something,
already
yeah.
international. Like, it already has international support, and like it's said that police forces around the world are going to be able to come to this facility. So,
And that's exactly a sort of school of the Americas type scenario. For people who are not familiar with that, that was where the United States trained all kinds of death squads, and I think Pinochet directly was trained there.
oh
And
God,
it eventually was shut down and then moved. It was in the Panama Canal Zone for a while. But yeah, it was like it was a right-wing death squad terrorist training facility basically operated by the United States. We are seeing a global far right convergence as capitalism goes through what may be its last stand, trying to defend itself at the end of its existence. And it's looks, like it's getting super violent. And so they're, taking all of the steps that they can take to gather as much force to make the stand that they're making. So there's a quote here from Kamau Franklin of Community Movement Builders talking about that potential RICO case. Says, quote, the city of Atlanta and the state of Georgia are working together to repress the Stop Cop City movement, just as historically the state has always tried to repress movements that fight for people's rights and liberties. Just as in the past it was the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement that was targeted by the state, now we have movements today which are fighting against police violence and police militarization, which are also being targeted by the state. We must stand strong and stand together and fight against these efforts to repress our movement. And so there's other quotes that people want to look at that article. It's an interesting article. But I think that that is one of the key things is, people, especially younger people becoming interested in this topic, realize that the history of this didn't begin when you learned about it. There's a thread going back decades in the class struggle where these themes get played out over and over again. And if we want to be successful in our organizing, it really helps to know that history and understand those dynamics over time. I think one of the things we're going to look at is some of that militarization and how the police got this militarized to where, now there are major calls for abolition. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else before we got into that.
No, let's get right into abolition.
All right, let's do it. So we have an article from militarytimes.com. Title of this is Post 9/11 Conflicts Increased Civilian Police Militarization, New Study Claims. Article from September 2020. 2020 being a big year for all of these abolition, again, the summer of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests when people were off work due to the lockdowns. And where did people head? They headed right into the streets because people are really fed up with a lot of stuff going on in this country. So we saw, calls for abolition and discussing the defund the police movement and abolish the police movement, showing up even in places like the New York Times and Vox and NBC News. Like everybody ran at least one story about this, although obviously not nearly as much as could have happened translated into political action. They were doing it largely to just appease the protesters. But this piece is about a study connecting the war on terror, which has been going on for the last 20 years or so, with how the police got so militarized. So if you want to look at this again over the longer timeline, SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics. These are the super decked out, extra equipment police squads. Those were developed in the 1960s, but they really didn't get big until the 1980s and 1990s. Then in the 2000s, the war on terror, you have all of this money floating around to give military equipment to cops. A lot of the cops are people who got deployed into one of the many wars that the U.S. launched in the name of the war on terror, and then they bring them back. So you got people with this military training entering the police, units in various cities as well as rural areas. But let's read a bit about this article. Brown University released a study Wednesday claiming the correlation between U.S. military conflicts in the post 9/11 era and an increase in police militarization at home. So these things are connected. It's not just, oh, it happened over there. No, it gets mirrored here as well, because it's one class struggle overall. The study revisits the notion of the military-industrial complex and its profit-driven agenda at the expense of civilian casualties in the U.S. and abroad. It draws a parallel between the military's efforts to squash jihadis overseas, or at least that's what they told you they were doing, and police agencies' increasing role in countering domestic terrorism. And, it's not limited to just domestic terrorism. They got the people trained, they got the gear, they go out and they use it in their regular policing. So they quote, police departments raced to develop counter-terror systems. Meanwhile, the scale and profits of military-industrial corporations mushroomed as the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and then Iraq. The study's author, Jessica Katzenstein, wrote, these forces converged with the growth of specialized police training and tactics to combat the rising number of mass shootings and with more recent military drawdowns from active war zones to vastly inflate an existing pipeline from the military and the federal government down into local police, end quote. Not only were military weapons manufacturers courting police agencies directly, the study claims, but a secondary market for surplus military equipment was created during the Bill Clinton administration in the Defense Logistics Agency's 1033 program. Its effects can likely be seen recently on city streets during protests in the form of MRAPs, or mine-resistant ambush-protected armored vehicles. It's basically mini tanks that get deployed during protests. As of June, there were 8,200 federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies participating in the program. So you got thousands of law enforcement at every level, getting this equipment, and they're taking that military that was deployed overseas and they're bringing it back here. So this is a key thing in the anti-war movement and why that needs to be tied in with the fight against imperialism and everything else, because again, it's ultimately all one struggle. So anyway, the article goes on. We'll put a link to it. But this is, I think, a good jumping off point for understanding now. It's 2023. We're living in this environment of heavily militarized police, which has only been, expanded that much more due to all of the foreign wars that the U.S. is fighting. And so we get the movements for police reform and police abolition, which I would describe, and we have two examples, the 8 Can't Wait, which is more of a reformist movement, and the 8 to Abolition movement, which, as its name implies, is more of an abolitionist movement, which was in fact created in response to the 8 Can't Wait. So 8 Can't Wait, more of a reformist movement. I would say that the reformist movements, they don't fundamentally question the idea that we need policing, we need a lot of policing. Quantitatively, it's kind of the same. They want to change some of the ways that the policing is done, but they don't want to fundamentally question that police is how we should solve, all the problems that it's being deployed against. Because the abolition movement is all about just reducing policing and replacing it with something else. But to talk about the 8 Can't Wait, their 8 points are, and I'll read these and then we'll compare to the 8 to Abolition. The 8 pretty weak points in 8 Can't Wait are ban chokeholds and strangleholds, require de-escalation, require a verbal warning before police use deadly force. Fourth is requires the exhausting of all alternatives before using deadly force. The fifth one is a duty of cops to intervene in other cops using excessive force. Sixth is banning shooting at moving vehicles.
That's like wild that they do that in the first place. Like, what? I'm sorry.
It is. Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no,
wow.
no, totally.
Like, these are fucking wild. Like, requires exhaust all alternatives before using deadly force. Like, yeah, the fact that we have to say that is a fucking problem, though. Like, what? Like,
yeah, it shows how out of control it is.
We need to take away deadly force. Like, that's not. How about that? That is the logical solution, not like require warning before use of deadly force. Like, what? That's not stopping the use of deadly force, though. I want people to stop dying.
And what does it amount to in practice? It's like, warning, boom.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I tried to exhaust all the other alternatives, but I had to shoot him. What?
Yeah, these are shockingly weak. And as I was reading it, as doing the research for this, I was like, these are like incredibly weak. And then to find out 8 to Abolition was like created as a direct like improvement on this, or counter to it. I was
and
like,
it is
thank
too,
God
so.
somebody thank God somebody did that. But they say under the banning shooting at moving vehicles, the point is ban officers from shooting at moving vehicles in all cases, which is regarded as a particularly dangerous and ineffective tactic.
Yeah, people die from that. Like, you're gonna shoot random houses because you're like all gassed up. Like, no, I'm not shooting at people.
Well, it says that 62 people were killed by police last year just in situations of cops shooting at a moving vehicle.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The seventh point is require a use of force continuum. So like, the least severe types of force and then the most severe, and you have to use the least forceful thing first. and then require comprehensive reporting. So these are kind of the I would take that as one of the best developed reformist platforms.
And
The thing
it's
about it, though,
terrible.
well, yeah, as they show on their website, most of these are already in effect in most of the top 100 cities in the United States.
So it hasn't
So
improved policing at
no,
all. It hasn't like stopped the dangers like of to the community of policing. So
right.
it's
And so, we'll
useless.
say abolish the police, and then the response is like, well, what if we didn't abolish the police, but we just sort of changed some of the things. And so this is where you get the Joe Biden thing of like, no, we need to properly train them and give them better equipment,
That's how they
like
end
the
up
body
getting more
cameras.
more funding, right? Because body cameras cost money and training costs money. Training facilities cost more money, so they need increase in their budget. And then we
Exactly. And
just end
then,
up giving them fucking more money.
yeah, the companies that make them get rich off of those contracts. And then in the case of the body cameras, then you can, oh, how about you hook up facial recognition technology to that camera footage, et cetera, et cetera. So all you're
Hmm.
really doing in the end is you're making a stronger police force. You haven't done anything to change the basic problem that policing doesn't fix these social problems. And you've actually reinforced and made it harder to take apart some of these institutions. Now, not every type of reform is necessarily strengthening police and working across purposes to abolition. For example, you could consider banning no-knock warrants, as we discussed in the last episode, a type of reform. However, I would again basically say like the reformism, it's qualitative. They want to keep the same amount of policing, but just change its nature a little bit to the extent that you even can change its nature. But then the abolition, it's like, no, 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 we need less, quantitatively less. And so
Okay, so I can
there
go
is,
over the
yeah,
abolition section if you want. No?
yeah.
Okay. So actually, I'm going to read the thing at the top because it's pretty good. So, at their roots, policing and prisons are systems designed to uphold oppression. 1,000 people are killed by police every year, sometimes more. I mean, most of the time it's more. And black people are murdered at 3 times the rate of white people. Up to 50% of people murdered by the police have disabilities. Up to 40% of police officers have perpetrated intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And the second most common form of police brutality, primarily targeting black women and especially those who are sex workers and drug users. Many of these incidents of police violence are undocumented by studies and only uplifted through grassroots movement. Prisons, police, and prosecutors worked closely together to sustain white supremacy, capitalist, ableist, and cis heteropatriarchal systems of extraction and death. Black people who are women, trans, gender nonconforming, sex working, and queer are often criminalized for actions they take to survive gendered violence, as we have seen in the case of Tracy McCarter, Alicia Walker, Gigi Thomas, Marissa Alexander, Brescia Meadows, Cyntoia Brown, and many others. We reject the notion of a perfect survivor. We do not believe anyone deserves to be caged, nor do we prescribe to the state's notion of innocence and culpability. We recognize that the system of policing is intertwined with the prison and military industrial complex, both here and abroad. In abolishing policing, we seek to abolish imperialist forms of police, such as militaries responsible for generations of violence against black and brown people worldwide. We believe in a world where there are zero police murders because there are zero police. Abolition can't wait. So, their 8 are defund the police, demilitarize communities, remove police from schools, free people from jails and prisons, repeal laws that criminalize survival, invest in community self-governance, provide safe housing for everyone, invest in care, not in cops. So the end goal of these reforms is not to create better, friendlier, more community-oriented police or prisons. Instead, we hope to build a society without police or prisons where communities are equipped to provide for their safety and well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the major difference is you can't really reform this. The whole history of policing in the United States, and there have been a number of histories written. One I have read is called Our Enemies in Blue by, I think it's Christian Williams. And going back to the root, we're talking about slave patrols that were designed to keep slaves from rebelling or escaping. And the whole history of police is political. It's tied to the defense of capitalism. If we're serious about changing this system, which is strangling us, strangling the planet, it's just giving us no future, then we have to get rid of the system, the policing system, which is its enforcement arm and prevents us from changing it. And as far as the limited imagination that people have, as far as like, well, if we get rid of the cops, what then? Well, we got to start out, first of all, by recognizing that police don't keep us safe. They don't
They
actually
don't
do the
solve
things
crime.
yeah, they don't do the things that you think that they do in the first place. They're not serving those beneficial purposes. But beyond that, well, how do you get rid of them, without things getting dangerous? Well, first of all, getting rid of them will make things less dangerous, as has been seen in a variety of cities that have tried, we could maybe call semi-abolition programs that have either that have made major sweeping changes in defunding and other similar types of quantitative reductions in policing. It has just across the board positive effects. But there's a quote here by Alex S. Vitale, who is an academic studying and writing about police abolition. Describes it as a process. And actually, I hope I'm not sure if it's a he or Alex can be whatever. But anyway, they describe it as police abolition is a process, not just a singular event. So the quote is, I'm certainly not talking about any kind of scenario where tomorrow someone just flips a switch and there are no police. What I am talking about is the systematic questioning of the specific roles that police currently undertake and attempting to develop evidence-based alternatives so that we can dial back our reliance on them. Now, the thing about evidence-based alternatives, we can study society scientifically. We can see what effects different policies have, and you can have evidence-based alternatives to police. Continuing the quote, and my feeling is that this encompasses actually the vast majority of what the police do. We have better alternatives for them. Even if you take something like burglary, a huge amount of burglary activity is driven by drug use. So we need to completely rethink our approach to drugs so that property crime isn't the primary way that people access drugs. We don't have any part of this country that has high quality medical drug treatment on demand, but we have policing on demand everywhere, and it's not working. So there is a sort of lack of political, and that's the end of the quote. Quoting another abolitionist, there's a lack of political imagination beyond the electoral strategy and reformism, and the inability to envision a world or even a country devoid of police and prisons. This is rooted in anti-black, racialized colonial logics of the biologically determined criminal, slave, and savage. That's from a researcher named Briand. So, that for me is, I think, for people listening to this to, have as a jumping off point, thinking about this, if you haven't maybe come to terms with those roots of the U.S., and I mean, that is where the police system comes from, refrain from having a knee-jerk, we need police to make us safe. Because actually the entire system that what we're encountering today in 2023 came from is from a hundreds of years old system of oppression. And developing the kind of political or sociological imagination to imagine something else beyond the assumptions that keep propping up the way that we're doing things now. You got to actually spend some time scaling that back in your own mind and confronting those assumptions. It's not an easy thing, but we have to do it. And, of course, we put out shows like this to sort of try to help inspire and catalyze that process.
Right. So, yeah, I think that if policing was the way it should be, then I don't even know. What would that look like to me? I think that that would look like cops solving murders and not contriving crime like out and about. I don't know why they patrol places because patrol doesn't make anybody safer. I don't know.
Well,
It
well,
just
no,
feels
sure.
like
So,
some
so,
fascist fucking. I don't know. And then
well, so
like, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's fine. In the vein of, reimagining and challenging these assumptions. So the assumption is police patrols are there to keep communities safe. What if that's not actually what they're there to do? And that's not actually why the rich propertied people who rule and own this country want them to be doing. And that's not the sort of metrics that they're using in evaluating the effectiveness police. What if the actual purpose of patrols is to A, protect property, and B, keep the property less people off guard and vulnerable and under the threat of police violence and imprisonment, etc. I'd say if those were the goals that only work in the interest of a very tiny class of the richest people, then it's working exactly as designed. And that's part of the problem of the reformist approach that there's good policing that we can do, there's better policing, we just need to change the way it's done. No, in fact, most of the policing and over policing, it's done specifically to keep people feeling the way that we're feeling now, off balance and afraid, terrified of confronting this system for all the injustices that it does.
Yeah.
Which takes us right back around to Stop Cop City and the way that protesters are being treated there.
They're being murdered in their tents for just being there.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, no legitimate reason,
right.
but for the interest of, for the reason of, uh, what if the police weren't out doing that? Well, then the protesters might start attracting, more and more people from Atlanta to come out there and get involved in it. But if there's, police death squads roaming the forest, that's going to make it super scary for people who aren't the most,
Right.
committed vanguard of activists to get out there and put their bodies on the line.
Yeah.
Because they have a hard enough time day to day putting their bodies on the line, just going to work and coming home.
Exactly. So yeah, the intent of the murder of Tortuguita is fear. It's spread community fear.
Seems that way.
Rest in peace.